They whispered it through the halls of the Dominion fleet like a contagion that would not die. The humans will not bow. I was Supreme Strategos Var'kath, heir to centuries of conquest, and I did not tolerate whispers. My word was iron, my will, law. For 10,000 cycles, I had watched civilizations kneel before our legions. Some resisted for days, others for years, but all of them broke eventually. Stars dimmed, planets burned, and empires crumbled. It was the way of things, yet the name of this fragile backwater species spread through my fleet like a sickness. They were primitives who had only recently clawed their way into the void, still clinging to fragile machines that should have been swept aside like dust. And still my soldiers spoke of them with something I had not heard in centuries: fear. When the reports first reached me, I dismissed them as exaggerations born from the lower ranks. A handful of raids, ambushes at the edge of Dominion territory, and nothing more. What could they truly be? They were not the Lithari with their suns' forged blades. They were not the Sarathi who could bend matter itself into weaponry. These humans were flesh and bone, easily broken, easily consumed. But then the day came when their fleet rose over Cygni Prime. I remember the silence of the bridge as the sensors drew their forms against the void. Their ships were not beautiful, not like ours. Dominion craft were works of art. Curved wings of obsidian, latticework thrumming with power, the symmetry of Dominion embodied in steel. Theirs looked like carrion beasts, plates of metal welded to scars, engines patched with fire and desperation, hulls marked not with banners of glory but with wounds, blackened craters where battles had torn them open, now sealed with crude plating. And yet, there they were, a line of predators daring to block the throat of my armada. "Strategos," murmured my second, her crest bent low in deference. "They do not withdraw." "Then they will be erased," I answered, my voice steady, but I could not ignore what I felt. Unease, sharp, invasive, unwelcome. For there is a language older than words, one all warriors know. The stance before battle, the posture of prey or predator. These humans stood in the void not as prey but as hunters. Their wounded ships aligned with feral precision. And then came the transmission. The screen flickered, static streaking across its surface, before resolving into the image of their commander. A human female, her form encased in armor stripped of ornament, scarred and functional. Her eyes, I will never forget them, not glowing with power as the scions of the Dominion, not blackened voids like the assassins of the Carthian dynasties. No, these eyes were alive with something far more dangerous: will. Her voice cut through the chamber like a blade. "Kneel first, just that. 2 words. Calm, unshaken, without flourish." It was not arrogance, though my officers bristled as if insulted. It was a dare, an invitation into madness, a challenge given not as prey to predator, but as equal to equal. Around me, I felt my legions stir, soldiers who had never faltered, who had torn apart worlds, shifting in unease. Their claws tapped against steel. Their crests twitched with agitation. Even the seasoned veterans turned their eyes from the screen, as though fearing her gaze might reach through the void and seize their souls. I wanted to laugh, to crush the weight of that moment beneath mockery. But the sound would not come. For in her words, I heard something that even the Dominion itself had forgotten. Defiance not bred from arrogance, but from necessity. These humans did not fight for conquest. They fought for survival. And survival, I knew, made demons of mortals. We had seen it before, in the twilight of the Zayari Empire. Cornered in their last system, they unleashed weapons that devoured suns, scorched their own worlds, and nearly unmade themselves in the process. They had lost, yes, but the fury of their survival had scarred our dominion for centuries. The humans carried that same glimmer, but magnified, distilled, sharpened into something I could not yet name. "Strategos," hissed my first commander. "Give the order." "We will shatter their line before this insolence spreads." I turned to him, my voice colder than the void. "And if we fail? If they resist, as the whispers claim?" The commander's jaw flexed, his silence louder than any answer. I looked again at the human woman. She did not flinch beneath the weight of our armada, did not falter as her fleet, pitiful in comparison, but faced annihilation. Instead, she waited, eyes locked upon me, daring me to move first, and I felt it. For the first time in centuries, I felt the tremor of doubt. The Dominion had crushed countless civilizations, but all had fought for empire, for honor, for the hollow pride of survival under banners of conquest. These humans, they fought for something smaller and infinitely greater, the right to exist. The bridge grew heavy with silence, and in that silence, I realized a truth I dared not speak. These humans were not prey. They were not even rivals. They were a storm waiting to break, and as their commander's words echoed across the void, "Kneel first," I knew with chilling certainty that when the storm came, it would not pass gently. Cliffhanger, transition ending. I gave the order my soldiers demanded, though my heart was ash. Prepare the fleet. The Dominion strikes at dawn cycle. But as the fleet stirred and weapons roared to life, a whisper gnawed at the edges of my mind, unyielding and terrible. What if this time the storm does not break upon us, but consumes us whole? The void erupted with fire. When the Dominion strikes, there is no mercy, no hesitation. We fall upon our prey like the judgment of gods. Our ships move as one, black wings cutting across starlight, precision honed by centuries of conquest. I gave the order, and the storm was unleashed. Orbital firestorms rained down from our dreadnoughts, spears of plasma that split the heavens and scoured worlds. Swarms of drones poured forth, a tide of steel and hunger, each one programmed to devour whatever life it found. Our shock troops, vat-born, armored, bred to consume resistance, surged through the corridors of shattered stations and the broken shells of human frigates. By every measure of war, the humans should have broken, and yet they did not. Their ships, crude as they were, did not scatter. They did not retreat. They wove through our fire like predators in a hunt, slipping into the fractures of our formation. They fought with a recklessness that should have been suicidal. Instead, it was devastating. One of my captains snarled across the comms, his vessel tearing through a cluster of human fighters. "They throw themselves into our guns like fools!" But I watched closer. Their foolishness was deliberate. They sacrificed willingly, not in panic, but in calculation. Every lost ship opened a path for another. Every reckless strike bought a moment for their commander to reshape the battle. They moved like wolves. Wolves do not fear the loss of the weakest among them. Wolves use blood to draw their prey into a trap. And in that battle I saw it. The pack. They fought as if bound by a singular will, each ship, each soldier part of some invisible unity. Our losses began to mount, not in numbers but in places that mattered. A drone carrier gutted, a command vessel torn open at its throat, and then came the destroyer. It was a ruin of a craft, bleeding atmosphere, engines sputtering. By all logic, it should have fled or fallen silent. Instead, it ignited its last drive and hurled itself forward, straight into the heart of my line. My fleet moved to intercept, but too late. I watched as the battered destroyer slammed into one of our carriers, its core detonating in a flare brighter than the sun. The shockwave tore through the formation, igniting a chain reaction. One carrier fell, then another, dreadnoughts colliding as their systems screamed and died. Thousands of my soldiers were extinguished in an instant, swallowed in fire. For a moment, there was silence, stunned silence, across my command deck. The Dominion had not lost carriers in centuries. We were the devourers, not the devoured. It was then that her face returned. The human commander. Broadcast across every channel, her visage appeared amid static and flame. Her armor was cracked, her cheek bloodied, but her eyes burned with unbroken light. Her voice carried through the void. "We are the line. Break us, and you break yourselves." I felt my soldiers stiffen. Some trembled. Others whispered those words like a chant, as if prophecy had been spoken. Even my commanders, seasoned, merciless, fell silent, their eyes fixed upon her, and I felt something I had not allowed myself to feel in centuries. A seed of dread, growing fast. We had unleashed the full fury of the Dominion, the storm that had consumed empires older than stars. But these humans did not cower. They did not flee. They learned every scar became a lesson. Every failure a weapon. Where other civilizations required generations to adapt to our strategies, the humans needed only hours. We struck them once, they struck us twice. We learned their pattern, they shattered it before it was written. They twisted chaos into art. They turned desperation into precision. It was not simply resistance. It was evolution, accelerating before my eyes. "Strategos!" my first commander hissed, fear cracking through his voice. "We must crush them quickly. Every moment we delay, they grow stronger," I finished, my throat dry. I had thought of them as animals, cornered beasts gnashing teeth at the inevitable. But beasts do not learn. Beasts do not adapt within the heartbeat of a battle. These were no beasts. They were something far worse. They were predators learning to kill gods. The battle raged on, but the tide was shifting in ways my charts could not predict. Our formations, once flawless, became fragile. Every strike we landed cost us more than we could replace. Every victory bled us dry, and always, always her voice lingered in the silence between volleys. "We are the line. Break us and you break yourselves." My soldiers repeated it, as if her words had coiled into their minds. Not taunt, not command, prophecy. It spread like wildfire, insidious, unstoppable. I clenched my claws against the arm of my throne. Rage should have come easily. But rage faltered against the cold realization that had begun to claw at me. Perhaps, for the first time, the Dominion had not chosen its prey. Perhaps, for the first time, it was the prey that had chosen us. Cliffhanger transition ending. As the battle reached its crescendo, I stared into the void where their commander's fleet still held the line. Scarred, bleeding, but unbroken. And a thought, terrible in its clarity, burned into me. What if we had awakened something that could not be caged? We thought it was over. Cygni Prime, their last stronghold, lay broken beneath our fleets. Its domes cracked and bleeding atmosphere. Its defenses shattered, reduced to sparks and silence. We encircled the world in fire and steel. My officers assured me that it was only a matter of time. That within cycles, humanity would be extinguished, like so many before them. Victory should have been inevitable, and yet, as the siege stretched on, unease seeped into the bones of my legions. For the longer we starved them, the stronger they seemed to grow. At first, it was resistance from their soldiers, ragged remnants of fleets and divisions, fighting with guerrilla cunning. But soon, reports came of something far stranger. Children wielding rifles scavenged from the fallen. Civilians shaping rubble into traps that swallowed squads whole. Families converting their shattered homes into ambush sites, choking our advance with fire and shrapnel. Every human became a combatant. Every street, every ruin, every shadow, a blade aimed at our throats. When finally I gave the order to breach the city walls, expecting collapse and despair, what met us was not surrender. It was uprising. The gates fell, and the humans surged forward as one, roaring with voices that shook the rubble around them. Old, young, wounded, dying, and it mattered not. They came in a tide of flesh and fury, and my legions faltered. For everyone we cut down, 3 more rose. Their numbers should not have matched ours. And yet somehow they did, drawn from the very earth, as if the planet itself bled warriors. I remember the reports, carried to me by veterans who had never once faltered in the face of war. They spoke with trembling voices, their eyes wide with something worse than fear. "They do not stop, Strategos," one whispered. "We sever limbs and they crawl. We pierce hearts and they rise again. They laugh, Strategos, laugh even as they die." We called them mad, but I knew better. Madness is chaos without purpose. What I saw in them was not chaos. It was terrifyingly sane. The humans understood something we had long forgotten, that death itself is not defeat. That if the body breaks but the will endures, then victory is never claimed. Our troops advanced street by street, and every street became a battlefield. A plaza would be ours one day and lost the next. Towers fell not to our bombardments but to their traps, collapsing into our formations like spears of stone. Our drones were pulled into alleys and torn apart by hands wielding knives scavenged from the dead. Even our shock troops, giants bred in vats, armored in steel, spoke of nightmares, of faces that would not die. of foes who clawed their way back to their feet, bloodied and broken, with nothing but shards of glass to tear at them. We had made monsters of ourselves in our laboratories. But humanity became monsters without design. The city burned with the smell of scorched metal and seared flesh. Smoke choked the skies. Yet within that darkness, their eyes glowed with something brighter than fire: conviction. I remember standing at the edge of the command dais, watching the feeds of the siege unfold. A boy, no older than 10 cycles by their measure, ran forward with an explosive strapped to his chest, throwing himself beneath the legs of a Dominion mech. A woman, her arm severed at the shoulder, still dragged herself forward with a torch to ignite our munitions cache. An old man, his body brittle, stood in the street with nothing but a shard of rebar. And when 3 of our soldiers tried to cut him down, he took one with him into the abyss. My officers cursed them, called them mad, called them vermin. But I saw the truth. These were not acts of madness. These were acts of memory. Every human understood. Death was inevitable, but submission was not. And so they fought with a strength born not of survival, but of defiance. My legions had never faced such enemies. We had fought warriors, yes. We had fought zealots who would throw themselves upon our blades for the promise of paradise. But this was different. The humans did not fight for gods or empire or even victory. They fought for the right to say no, and that right was worth more than life itself. One of my commanders returned from the front lines, armor shattered, blood streaking his scales. He fell to his knees before me, trembling. "Strategos," he whispered, his voice raw. "They are not soldiers. They are death itself." I wanted to strike him for his cowardice, to remind him that the Dominion does not bow to fear. But the words caught in my throat. For I had seen the truth in his eyes, the same truth gnawing at the edges of my own mind. The humans were becoming something we could not measure, something we could not predict, something that should not exist, and yet did. The siege stretched on, day upon day, week upon week. The Dominion poured fire into that world, but fire only seemed to feed them. Their walls fell, their towers crumbled, but still they rose. I began to wonder if we were not besieging them, but if they were besieging us. For every night that passed, my soldiers slept less. Their dreams filled with human faces, laughing, bleeding, unyielding. Even within the safety of orbit, my officers spoke in whispers of phantoms crawling through the corridors of their ships. Fear spread, quietly, insidiously, the same way whispers of their defiance had spread before. And I, Supreme Strategos Var'kath, could no longer silence it. For in the shadows of Supreme Prime, in the smoke and fire of its burning cities, I had seen the truth. We had thought victory inevitable. But against foes who refused to die, what did victory even mean? Cliffhanger, transition ending. As I stared down upon the burning world, one thought refused to release me. Perhaps we had forgotten what it means to fight for existence itself. And perhaps the humans had come to remind us. And if that reminder spread beyond Supreme Prime, then the Dominion itself would tremble. Desperation is a poison. That is what we were taught in the Dominion academies. Desperation clouds judgment, weakens resolve, forces mistakes that end in annihilation. A desperate foe is already defeated. At least, that was the lesson we believed, until humanity proved us wrong. The siege of Supreme Prime should have broken them. Starvation, plague, endless bombardment, no species had endured so long under such pressure. And yet, instead of crumbling, they transformed. Desperation for them was not a poison. It was a crucible. Their scientists, half dead from exhaustion, twisted physics into shapes it was never meant to hold. Ruined reactors, their cores cracked and bleeding radiation, were dragged from collapsed facilities and wired into weapons. Collapsing power grids were reworked into traps that spat storms of electromagnetic fire, blinding our drones, shattering our comms, turning order into chaos. We thought them crude, yet their crudeness became brilliance. Where we required perfect systems and flawless design, they thrived in ruin. The more broken their tools, the more inventive their solutions. And then came the derelict. At first, It appeared as nothing, a shattered warship. Drifting in the void beyond Cygni Prime, sensors registered only silence. My officers dismissed it as wreckage, another corpse floating in the graveyard of the battle. But I watched closer. There was something deliberate in the way it drifted, the angle of its approach, as though a hand unseen guided it into the marrow of my fleet. By the time we realized the truth, it was too late. The derelict lit up with fire, its core detonating in a bloom that swallowed stars. The explosion tore through the heart of our formation, ripping apart 3 dreadnoughts as if they were paper. Shock waves cascaded, rupturing hulls, scattering fleets, leaving only silence where power had once ruled. Tens of thousands of my soldiers perished in a single searing instant. I should have roared in rage, should have declared vengeance, yet I stood frozen, my claws digging into the steel of my throne. For in that moment, I saw her face. The human commander. Projected across the fractured feeds, her image flickered amid static and fire. She was calm, unyielding, her eyes unwavering even as death and ruin surrounded her. She had dared to throw a coffin into the heart of gods and turn it into a weapon. It should have been madness. And yet it was not. It was clarity. My officers clamored for retribution. They demanded her capture, her execution, the erasure of her name from existence. "Break her!" they urged, "and the humans will crumble." But I remained silent, for in the depths of my thoughts, a darker possibility coiled like a serpent. What if breaking her spirit did not end them? What if it unleashed something worse? She was no empress, no god-queen, no ruler cloaked in prophecy. She was a soldier, one among many. And yet she embodied them all. She fought not for empire or conquest, but for those beside her, for every scarred ship, for every starving child, for every hand still clinging to defiance. And that made her infinite. I began to see it everywhere, in the way their fleets moved, no longer isolated fragments, but living organisms, adapting with terrifying speed. In the way their ground fighters fought, not for themselves, but for the comrade at their side. They died for each other, killed for each other, lived for each other. The Dominion did not understand this. We ruled through fear, obedience, hierarchy. We crushed unity beneath the weight of command. But these humans, their unity was not commanded. It was chosen. That choice made them unstoppable. Our analysts struggled to model their tactics. Patterns collapsed before they were finished. Predictions failed before they were written. Every strike we landed became the seed of a counterstrike. Every wound we inflicted became a lesson sharpened into a blade. It was as if they were not one species but a storm, constantly shifting, reshaping, becoming something new with every breath. And still, her face haunted me, calm, unbroken, not daring me to strike, but daring me to fail. In the silence of my chamber, I whispered words I dared not speak aloud. Perhaps we cannot kill her. Perhaps she is not one. Because if she was the embodiment of their defiance, then to kill her was to multiply her, to scatter her spirit across every human heart, until they all bore the same unyielding fire. My officers did not see it. They believed in the old lessons, the old truths, crush the leader, and the rest will fall. But I knew better. She was not their weakness. She was their reflection, and reflections once cast cannot be destroyed. The war shifted that day. Not in territory gained, not in battles won, but in silence, in the uneasy way my legions moved. For the first time in centuries, the Dominion knew doubt, and for the first time in centuries, I, Supreme Strategos Var'kath, felt the chill of something greater than fear. Hope. Not my own. Theirs. A hope so sharp it could cut empires apart. Cliffhanger. Transition. Ending. As I stared into the void, her words unspoken yet deafening in my mind, a realization took root like a plague I could not cure. They do not fight for conquest. They fight for one another, and that makes them infinite. And if the infinite had turned against us, then the Dominion's reign of gods was ending. I demanded parley. Not because I believed it would end the war. Not because I feared her fleets, though they had bloodied us. No, I demanded partly because I needed to see her. Needed to confront the mortal who had defied the Dominion, who had turned derelicts into daggers and corpses into banners. They brought her image across the void. She stood not in robes of command, nor beneath banners of glory. She stood amid fire, the fractured bridge of her warship trembling around her, sparks spilling like dying stars, a mortal, framed by ruin. And yet, I felt as though I gazed upon something greater than any god I had ever been taught to worship. "Humans will kneel," I declared, my voice echoing through channels of steel and light. I told myself I spoke with the same authority I had used to crush 100 worlds, to break empires, to silence kings. But in truth, I spoke to reassure myself. Her gaze met mine, steady, unblinking, as if she looked not upon a conqueror, but upon something already dead. Then she answered. Her words were soft, spoken almost as a whisper. Yet they struck me harder than the explosion of any dreadnought. "Kneel first." 2 words, that was all. And never had words undone me so completely. The chamber around me fell silent. My officers, watching from the shadows, bristled with outrage. Some snarled for her immediate execution. Others demanded we sever the transmission, declaring it an insult beyond bearing. But I raised my claw, silencing them, because I felt it. The weight of her words pressing against my chest. Heavier than gravity, sharper than steel. She had not threatened me with fleets or weapons. She had not promised destruction. No. She had offered something far worse. Conviction. The kind of conviction that does not bend, that does not yield, that reshapes the course of history. We of the Dominion measured power in fleets, in armies, in worlds consumed. We measured worth by obedience and conquest. But in her eyes, I saw another measure. One beyond the Dominion's reach, a species that would rather burn than bow. A people who had made defiance into religion, survival into art, and sacrifice into immortality. And in that moment, I, Var'kath, Supreme Strategos, conqueror of 1,000 worlds, felt the weight of something I had never known before. Defeat, not on the battlefield, not in the clash of metal and fire, but here, in the quiet space between 2 wills, she had unmade me with a whisper. My voice faltered, though I masked it as best I could. "You fight a futile war. The Dominion cannot be broken. We are endless. We are inevitable." Her lips curled, not in arrogance, but in something worse. Pity. "Inevitable?" she said. "So were the storms that drowned our ancestors. So were the plagues that nearly erased us. So were the tyrants who built empires on our bones. We broke them all." I felt my pulse quicken, though I had not felt such fear since my youth. "You will kneel," I insisted, claw tightening against the armrest of my throne. "All kneel before the Dominion. All worlds, all species. It is the law of existence." Her answer was silence, then laughter, quiet and weary. Not the laughter of one who mocks, but the laughter of one who knows. "We kneel," she said finally, "but never to tyrants. We kneel beside one another, to lift the fallen, to carry the broken. We kneel to mourn, to honor, to remember, but never to you." The chamber around me blurred. My officers shifted uneasily. I felt their unease like a knife at my back. She had spoken a truth they could not unhear. I tried to rally, to reassert the weight of 1,000 victories behind me. "Your people are dying." "You cannot win," her gaze sharpened. "Then we will die on our feet. Better ashes than chains." The words carved themselves into me. Better ashes than chains. I had faced countless foes who begged for mercy, who pleaded for their worlds, who knelt willingly to spare themselves the lash. Yet here was a species who saw death not as an end, but as a weapon, one they would wield against us until nothing remained. And what empire, what army could truly conquer that? I ended the parley with a gesture, the screen dissolving into static. I could not bear to see her eyes upon me any longer, but her words lingered, echoing in the silence of my chamber, gnawing at the foundations of everything I had built my existence upon. "Humans will kneel," I had said. Kneel first, she had answered. The duel had been fought. And though no blood was spilled, though no blade was drawn, I knew the truth. I had lost. The war still raged. Armies still clashed. Worlds still burned. But none of it mattered anymore. For in the heart of one mortal woman burned a defiance that no empire could extinguish, and I, conqueror, strategist, god of war, had felt it. For the first time, I understood the terror my soldiers whispered of in the trenches, the awe my officers hid behind their anger. The humans had become something more than enemies. They had become inevitable, and if the Dominion could not bend them, then perhaps it was the Dominion that would kneel. Cliffhanger, transition, ending. As I sat alone, her words burning like brands upon my soul, I realized something that chilled me to the core. This war would not be decided by fleets or weapons. It would be decided by will, and hers was greater than mine. The war spiraled beyond control, not because of their fleets, not because of their weapons. No, it was something far worse, the fracture within my own legions. At first, it was small. Whispers in the barracks, a hesitation before battle, soldiers refusing to repeat the old victory chants before deployment. But whispers became words, and words became defiance. Commanders began reporting the unthinkable, warriors turning their ships away rather than face human guns again. Entire battalions demanded reassignment to safer fronts, safe fronts, against primitives, against mortals we had deemed beneath record, beneath history. I told myself it was cowardice. Yet deep within, I knew the truth. It was not fear of death. It was fear of something greater, fear of them, the humans. For every battle they fought and lost, they grew sharper. Every death was not an ending, but a lesson written in blood. And every time we struck, their resistance grew not weaker, but stronger. Reports from the front reached me like poisoned daggers. A carrier abandoned mid-battle. A drone swarm hacked and turned against its masters. A garrison burned, not by human guns, but by our own soldiers unwilling to fight. My empire, endless and unbroken for centuries, was splintering. Worse still, the revolts began. From the outer colonies came fire. Species long enslaved by our banners rose in sudden defiance, their chains cast off, their voices chanting human words. They fought with desperation, yes, but also with hope. I heard the reports, each more absurd than the last. That which kneels cannot rise. That was our creed. That was our law. Yet everywhere I now heard another echo. We are the line. Break us, and you break yourselves. My soldiers whispered it. My slaves shouted it. My enemies carried it like fire. And at the center of it all was her, the human commander. She did not broadcast triumph. She did not declare conquest. No, her message remained the same, carried across the stars like a litany. We will endure. It should have been pitiful. It should have been weak. Endurance is not conquest, not dominion, not power, and yet, in endurance lay something my empire had forgotten. The seed of permanence, survival, and survival, given time, becomes power. Power, given time, becomes empire. And empire, given time, becomes dominion. I had thought to force humanity to kneel. Instead, I had given them a throne. The tide spread beyond war zones. Colonies I had never visited, worlds I had long since forgotten. They burned with new banners, with cries not of the Dominion, but of something far more dangerous. Unity. I had been trained to crush rebellions, to extinguish uprisings. But this was no rebellion. This was contagion, and the vector was humanity. I looked upon my legions, once my pride, now brittle shadows of their former glory. Their eyes no longer shone with certainty. Some stared at me as though I were already defeated. Others dared not meet my gaze at all. I saw the cracks in their armor, not of steel, but of faith. The Dominion had been more than armies and fleets. It had been an idea, a promise of inevitability. But inevitability had shattered. And once inevitability dies, empires do not endure. I paced the grand chamber of my flagship, its walls adorned with relics of conquered worlds, statues of kings, banners of fallen empires, weapons of those who had resisted us. Once they had filled me with pride. Now they felt like tombstones. Not of them, of us. I replayed her voice in my mind. That calm, unyielding voice. She had never sought glory, never demanded thrones. She spoke only of survival. And yet her survival had become the one thing my empire could not conquer. Supreme Strategos, one of my aides murmured, breaking my spiral. His eyes flickered nervously, betraying the fear he dared not speak. The colonies of Caraxes have fallen into open revolt. They fight under human colors. Impossible, I rasped. But even as I said it, I knew it was not. It was inevitable, just not the inevitability I had once believed in. I dismissed him and stood before the viewport, gazing into the abyss of stars. My reflection stared back at me, a conqueror who had unmade his own empire. History would not remember us as rulers, not as gods, not as destiny. No, history would carve our names in another way. We would be remembered as the warning, the shattered dominion, the broken inevitability, the graveyard upon which humanity built its throne. And for the first time, I envied them, not their weapons, not their endurance, but their clarity, for they knew something my empire had forgotten in all its centuries of conquest. That survival is not weakness, it is genesis, the seed of something infinite, and humanity had planted it deep. Cliffhanger, transition ending. As the stars stretched before me, I understood with crushing certainty the Dominion had already fallen. The only question left was not whether humanity would rise, but how far they would ascend. The war is over, not with treaties, not with banners of surrender, not even with the spectacle of our fleets burning in the void. No, it ended in silence. The kind of silence that comes when the inevitable finally dies. I walk now among the ruins of what was once the Dominion. Worlds that once sang our anthem now stand quiet, their spires shattered, their plazas scarred by revolt. My name once made armies tremble. Now it echoes only in the dust. I am not Strategos now. I am chronicler. Perhaps it is fitting. Perhaps one who once believed himself eternal must now be the one to write his own epitaph, and so I bear witness to humanity. They did not conquer us with numbers. Our fleets dwarfed theirs 100-fold. They did not conquer us with weapons. Our arsenals bent suns, while theirs scraped survival from ruins. No, they conquered us with something we could not kill. An idea. Never kneel. That was their creed. That was their weapon. And it cut deeper than any blade, burned brighter than any fire. Across the galaxy, their legend spreads. Whispers in the halls of once enslaved species. Chants in the marketplaces of liberated worlds. Songs carried through the void, whispered in fear. Sung in awe, the humans. The unbroken. The defiant. I see her face in every shadow, her eyes burning with that quiet, merciless certainty. I hear her voice in every uprising. Kneel first. She has become more than mortal. She has become story, and stories cannot be killed. We were wrong to believe survival was weakness. We were wrong to believe endurance was surrender. Humanity showed us that survival is not the absence of defeat. It is the refusal to be defeated. They were never meant to be rulers. Not like us. Not tyrants, not emperors. They were meant to be something far more dangerous. A reminder that even in the face of extinction, the will to stand unbroken can ignite a universe. I look upon the stars now and see their banners rising where once ours flew. Not banners of empire, not banners of dominion, but banners of defiance. It spreads like fire, this idea. To every species that once bowed beneath our chains. To every voice that once trembled before our decrees. To every child that once believed inevitability wore the mask of the Dominion. Now they know better. Now they whisper it, sing it, scream it. Humanity kneels to no one. And so I write these words, not as Strategos, not as conqueror, not even as survivor. I write as warning and as prophecy for the next empire that looks upon humanity and sees only frailty. For the next dominion that believes itself eternal. For the next tyrant that thinks to make them kneel. Know this, they will rise, they will endure, and they will stand unbroken long after your name is ash. for humanity kneels to no one. Cliffhanger, final resonance. As I etch the last words into record, I feel the weight of inevitability return. Not ours, but theirs. For if the stars themselves shift course, it will not be by the will of empires, but by the will of humanity.